Are you winning, son?
Acheron is an emanator of something. Some folks think nihility, Adventuring thinks finality, but I know her true identity. As somebody who's been around since 1.0,
Are you winning, son?
A thing of beauty, I know, will never fade away. What you did to me, I know. So what you had to say, but a thing of beauty, I know, will never fade away. And until my duty, I know.
Wuthering Waves is finally here. I wonder what people have to say about it.
Wuthering Waves is a Genshin ripoff.
I'm going to tell you for what aspect of Wuthering Waves is better than Genshin.
Or going back to Genshin after Wuthering Waves would make it feel really sluggish.
There are similarities between Genshin and Wuthering Waves.
Is worse than Genshin's Mondstadt.
Huh. You see, as somebody who has not played Genshin Impact, it's a bit confusing to understand how people feel about this game. A lot of the times they're comparing it to Genshin Impact. And don't get me wrong, comparisons are a good thing. In fact, they breed competition, and competition will result in better outcomes for us as the consumers. I simply just want to provide a point of view from somebody who has not played Genshin Impact before. The games that I have played before are Honkai Star Rail, that is my main game and my first ever gacha game. Other than that, I played Snowbreak, Nikkei, and recently AFK Journey, along with a few more just here and there. But I could never really get into Genshin. But with that being said, let's start the Wuthering Waves story review. The best way to describe Wuthering Waves story is consistently inconsistent. And I will say right now, I played the game with the English voice acting on, so we'll break the game down into 3 sections. The first section actually starts kind of strong in my opinion. The first person you meet is Yang Yang. She's more of the quiet girl. Although she will whisper so close into the microphone it'll make your ears bleed.
The Etheric Sea is converging. It seems a new tacit field is taking shape.
You also meet Chixia, the energetic pick-me girl who will never be picked. And finally, Baija with her giant sperm bird. You will not convince me otherwise. Together they're all here to adopt you, I guess. And on your way to sign those adoption papers, we stumble across our first combat of the game. A very simple fight with an elite. This was actually a great way to get a feel for the combat of the game, as the mob doesn't die too fast or too slow. In fact, through Union level 1 to 30, they did a great job at tuning all of the mobs to give you this feeling. But then you fight the Crownless. This fight was just very cool, and it definitely gets overlooked. This motherfucker wants to warm up by throwing hands. He don't need no fucking gauntlets either. And then when you get it to the second phase, he finally evolves and whips out his spear. Now he wants the smoke. So then you beat him cause, you know, plot. And then you suck him off.
What did he say?
In front of everyone. They all witness it. But on a real note, these combats were a clear high for me. But then we hit the first low. So after this great combat, they give you a lore dump. The game decides to go with the chosen one trope. But the thing is, the game doesn't want to just say we are, we have to like complete certain quests to prove it. And this goes on for about 3 or 4 acts. It is literally a non-stop blaze session. You're then given a brief stint of freedom, but once you reach the city, dear God, the game slows to a crawl. You have a meeting with the Ice Anbu Black Ops lady. She looks super cool. And then she gives you a bunch of the Riddler's garbage. Now if the game was like, sweet, go out there, solve the puzzles and come back, this part would have been totally fine. Instead, you gotta get tested. Now, to be honest, if it was just the testing part, I would understand, because it actually has a bit of a high in it. The test gets all funky, then you get to see some really cool foreshadowing of future events. I definitely did not appreciate this on my first playthrough. But for some reason, the devs decided the best way to follow up that cool cutscene was with paperwork and chores. Cool. This is by far the biggest low in the game. And this is the first time you meet a major problem with the game's story. And that is that the lore drops, the explanations, and instructions from dialogue is just super dragged out. They over-explain everything to you like you're 10 years old. And I would play an example for you, but I do not want you falling asleep. Once we're done learning about the Riddler's garbage, we pick up the monk lady and we finally leave the city. But thankfully, we get a much needed change of pace. The introduction of Jiyan was just cool. You get to fight the bird for the first time, you get to play the new limited 5-star character, which is always a positive in gacha games. And while it was short-lived, it definitely did wake me up. But then back to reality. Time for some more paperwork and lore dumps. Or so we thought.
Guess you won't need my self-introduction. Oh, I spent...
Finally, Scar is the first character in the English VA that actually has some personality to him. His voice actor did a fantastic job, and also it really helps that his animations, both in the cutscene and just in the dialogue talking to him, is really well done. There are two distinct things that make Scar stand out. The first is the choice. During the Scar segment, you're given an actual choice to hear him out or to just fight him. This actually makes you as a player think about, okay, what is he actually saying? Does he have anything of value to say to me? And overall, I think it just makes his character more engaging. It's the first real choice you have that affects the game itself. The second most important part is that he points out something that is really off about this game, and that is the non-stop glazing. You see, since the very beginning of the game, everyone glazes you. Now, I understand that this was actually a change from one of the original betas. Apparently, the Chinese audience really disliked that in the original betas, the characters were very hostile to you. And while I think that's fair, I don't think characters should be overly hostile, I just think that it should have been a more nuanced approach, not a complete 180 like it's happened here. I mean, surely gacha players' egos are not so fragile that we have to constantly be,
I should be the only motherfucker getting praise.
Okay, never mind. Yeah, but for real, I think it's great that Korra is very reactive to feedback. I just hope that they're not so extreme in their flips in the future, especially for more nuanced topics. But, you know, that's a video for another day. Back to Scar. Scar pointing out the glazing and him being very charismatic, I think is a large reason why you as a player want to hear him out. He also does you a massive favor when you first meet him. He makes it so you don't have to listen to Yang Yang for the next 30 minutes. And also, the story that he actually wants to tell you about the village is such a fascinating one. You know, really invoking questions of what wishes are worth what price, and if that price had to be paid by someone else, would you take it? But if you could also have to pay that price for someone else, would you take it? And using this like child narrative, the black and white, and who's the black lamb, who's not, who's the shepherd, it's just an excellent part. If you skipped it or you haven't played it, heavily recommend you do. And as your reward for finishing the story or skipping it, he takes you back to his crib. And the environment itself is great, floating pieces of land and road and highway. I personally just love this aesthetic. And then you get a pretty good one-on-one fight with him in a humanoid model. The reason why I say humanoid model is because that gives me faith that we'll get some really cool human v human battles in the future. And after all is said and done, you wake up in hell. Wait, never mind, Yang just confused me there. You finish learning the story of the village, and with that, you are now done solving the Riddler's garbage. Now this is part of the game where it really opens up and allows you to freely explore the world. All of the boss challenges now unlock, and you have to hit a certain union level to progress the story. And the next part of the story is actually pretty consistent in quality. It doesn't necessarily have the highest of highs, but it also does not have the lows that the first part is plagued with. So for this next part, we're going to focus more on the characters who are introduced and the beats around them, instead of just exactly what happened in the story. So the first character that we have to talk about is Jinzhou. She is gorgeous. Look at her. She is beautiful. Well, I don't think she's a super interesting character at the moment. I also don't think she's had her time to shine. I think 1.1 is where she will shine. But I do think this idea of a big decision she has to make that will, separate herself from Jue, maybe, is quite an interesting idea. Verena is simply just a sweet girl that loves flowers and her grandma. That's it. Simple but effective. Camellya. Dear God, the sexual tension is palpable. A character that must save the world for some reason, but she really doesn't want to. Camellya is actually a very interesting character for us to meet when introducing the Black Shores. What attracts people to the Black Shores? What is their real goal? If this lady doesn't actually give a shit about the world, why does she feel like she has this duty to save it? Although, once again, this cutscene with her just got so dragged out. Look, Kuro, if you don't know, Kumas can only last like 2 to 3 minutes, and going any longer puts them at great risk of post-nut clarity. Aalto is Wuthering Waves' attempt at introducing comedic relief to the story. And I actually don't think that's a bad thing. I don't think Aalto is even a bad character. I just think he suffers terribly from the dragged out dialogue present in this game. The slick criminal bit they were doing went on for so damn long. It goes on for 3 minutes before Encore and Verena show up, and then after they show up, it goes on for another 3 minutes. 6 minutes total on this one gag. Meanwhile, in the later quest, when it's just Aalto, you, and Encore, he's actually pretty interesting. 1, he's very knowledgeable, and 2, he seems to have some sort of hidden side to him. His voice direction is also pretty good. But I should say, since Scar, the voice work from then onwards is actually pretty good in general. Besides female Rover.
You're not going anywhere.
It's his ass. Although it should be said, Side has commented on the voice direction of the English dub. They said that halfway through the game, they took a different approach. And I actually believe that. Halfway through the game, the voice acting is much better. But yeah, I don't think the attempt at humor was bad. It's just it was murdered by being drawn out way too long. Encore is adorable and she murders with plushies. Great character. Overall, this section was pretty solid. And don't get me wrong, just like the first section, it had its lore dumps. It gave us lore dumps about the First War, about Fraxidus, about the Therodians and the Revivals, the Lament, Jue being missing, the Retroact Raid, the Black Shores faction, and more. A lot was introduced here, but it was introduced in a way that was more engaging than the first part. Maybe it's because there was more interesting characters, or maybe it's because we actually got attached to some of the characters. I'm not too sure, but whatever it is, it was far better here, and this part actually gives me more hope about the future of the story than Acts 5 and 6. Overall, a good middle section to the game, which allows for the final part to shine. the final part of the game. The Avengers Endgame of Gacha game. Before we get into it, I'll be avoiding spoilers. You probably won't see anything from Act 6 itself in this part of the review. That's simply because if this review is going to convince you to give the game another try, I'd rather you go into at least Act 6 by yourself. It is very much worth it. Alright, so this section is going to be a bit of a glaze fest. At this part of the game, it makes it very clear that there's a difference between Resonators, which are the characters that you play, these ones that have some sort of special ability, and non-Resonators, which are a lot of the guards and your normal people like civilians. It also does a far better job at expressing the harshness of these wars with the tacit discords. There are 3 great examples that I want to use to show how good this final part is. First of all, it's the Ghost Boys. Whenever you see these guys, they add so much to the story. I heavily recommend you stop and you talk to them, read them, listen to them. They're so good. My favorite of which are these 2 fellas. One of the soldiers is hallucinating and he can't tell the difference between friend or foe anymore. And it seems that no matter how much his friend begged for him to see reality, he did not. And it's implied that they both perished as they are still here in the rain. I hope this becomes a bit of a staple of storytelling, even though they're optional for most players to engage with. I think they do a great job at further building the feeling that Kuro is trying to communicate. The second example, the introduction of death in the present. You see, up to this point, death has always been in the past. We're always arriving afterwards, or we're looking at the history of an area. But the lone soldier by the giant laser cannon, he is the first person to die, as far as I remember, in the present. Some games seem to think that you can only introduce death as a stake through the death of a character of some kind. But I don't think killing a character just for the sake of it is the right call. I think character deaths should be very thoughtful and have very long-term consequences and actions. And in this scene, the voice work is very good. And the animations and the details and the facial expressions are all so good.
I may not see our victory in person, but please defeat that monster. For us. Thank you.
I know, Yang Yang. It should have been you. Okay, I'm joking. That was a joke. And I think the best part of this section is Jiyan and his ex-general, Geshu. The conversation and the presentation of these 2 is fantastic. And it also allows Kuro to flex how they can use their animations and even their camera angles to create these more story-driven moments, like, for example, the soldier turning into a remnant of the past.
Jiyan. General. Help. Please. Help me. What do you make of this, Jiyan? Maybe you are right.
This is then followed up by Geshu himself, a ghost of Jiyan's past, standing right behind him. This scene adds so much depth to Jiyan, he arguably becomes the best written character in 1.0. And funnily enough, I think the second best written character is actually Geshu. And he's dead. Probably not. This is a gacha game. It really nails the feeling that Jiyan, as a general, as a young man, has had to fill in the shoes of an incredibly determined and powerful general in the form of Geshu. See, Geshu gets this super badass cutscene dedicated to him in this beautiful art style. And it shows his decision to send any soldier alive, essentially to their death, just so he can break through and take out the Therodian. And while he was successful in taking down the Therodian, he himself disappeared. and the loss of life was so extreme that everybody remembers him with a tainted legacy. Yet now here's Jiyan, in the same position as Geshu was. He has a bunch of resonators and non-resonators alongside of him. There's a Therodian about to be resurrected, and he has to make the call. How will he make sure the errors of the past do not come back to haunt him? This was great, and I definitely hope that Geshu comes back in some way, shape, or form. I think the showdown between him and Jiyan has a lot of potential, and I really hope if that's the plan, Koro nails it. But these three things set up the final act to feel important. It feels important to you, it feels important to Jiyan, and it feels important to everybody else you had to leave behind. And yes, that includes Yang Yang. Oh, and that is my review of the Wuthering Waves story. There are still the character stories, and at the time of recording, Yinling's story did just drop. But yeah, I think that's enough for this one. This has been a marathon. I hope it was a bit insightful to see what somebody who hasn't played Genshin thought about the game. I think if I had to give the story a rating, I don't really think about this, but out of 10, I'd probably give it a 7 out of 10. The only reason why I'm not giving it an 8 is because I think the beginning of the story is far more important than the middle and the end. It doesn't matter how good the finale is if everyone quits in the first act. Overall, I'm very interested in Wuthering Waves, and I think it has a lot of potential, and I'll share my thoughts on the rest of the game as a whole in a later video, as I do think there's a lot of good things and a few bad things that could definitely be discussed. Other than that, I hope the game does well, and I really hope it doesn't just fade away into obscurity amongst the sea of gacha games. Please do leave a like, comment, and subscribe for more. Also, please share the video. I would love to know what other people think. Thank you. I'll see you next time.